World Bank's Economic Outlook, Gloom and Hope. We've spent the last week poring over the World Bank's massive Global Economic Prospects report, all 250 pages of it, so you don't have to. We've extracted the most fascinating insights about where the global economy is headed, with a special focus on South Asia. This is a story worth understanding. Part 1. The gloomy global economy. The global economy has hit what economists are calling an inflection point, and the numbers tell a sobering story. We're looking at global growth stabilizing at 2.7% for 2025 and 2026. Now, that might not sound terrible, but here's the crucial context. It's significantly below the 3.1% average we saw in the pre-pandemic decade, and this isn't just a temporary dip. We're seeing structural changes that suggest this could be our new normal. Source: World Bank. Let us paint a picture of what's happening on the ground. Global trade, which has always been a key driver of growth, is facing significant challenges. This is affecting businesses, reducing opportunities, and having a real impact on people's everyday lives. Source: World Bank. Here's where it gets worrying. We're seeing what experts call trade fragmentation. In 2023, global trade restrictions reached their highest level since records began in 2009. And it's no longer just about tariffs. It now includes export controls, investment restrictions, and complicated regulatory hurdles. Take the semiconductor industry, for example. There's been a major shift in how companies decide where to produce and invest. Instead of focusing purely on economic efficiency, many are now making decisions based on geopolitical factors. This is reshaping global supply chains in a big way. Now, let's look at the potential impact of changes in U.S. trade policies. Our analysis shows that a 10% increase in U.S. tariffs could reduce global growth by 0.2 percentage points. If other countries retaliate, which history suggests is likely, that impact could grow to 0.3 percentage points. To put this into perspective, that's roughly the same as wiping out the entire annual economic output of a country like New Zealand. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough: the services trade. While most attention is on goods, services trade has actually been growing faster since the early 2010s. Today, services make up 24% of global trade, which is fundamentally changing how economies grow and respond to global challenges. The combination of higher interest rates and slower growth poses significant challenges, especially for developing economies. Now, let's talk about monetary policy because it's a key piece of the puzzle. But first, a quick look at inflation. By late 2024, headline inflation was at or below target in over 60% of economies, and in most other places, it was only slightly above target. Policy rates in advanced economies are expected to come down in 2025. However, and this is important, they'll still be much higher than the unusually low levels we saw in the 2010s. While inflation has been declining in most advanced economies and emerging market and developing economies (EMDEs), strong economic growth and rising wages could lead to global inflation staying higher than expected. If that happens, central banks in both advanced economies and EMDEs might keep interest rates high for longer, which could slow down economic activity in EMD regions. In EMDEs, nearly 70% of countries are expected to experience slower trade growth in 2025-26 compared to their average from 2010-19. This mix of higher interest rates and slower growth creates serious challenges for developing economies. Part 2. The rise of EMDEs. Now, here's where our story takes a fascinating turn. While developed economies have been struggling, emerging market and developing economies, or EMDEs, have been rewriting the rules of the global economy. The numbers are staggering. EMDEs now account for 45% of global GDP, up from 25% in 2000. They're responsible for 60% of annual global growth, double their contribution from the 1990s. They are also home to 85% of the world's population. And here's a stat that really drives home the shift. EMDEs received 21% of global capital inflows during 2019-2023, compared to just 6% in 2000-2004. Source: World Bank. The real game changers have been what we call the EM3: China, India, and Brazil. Together, they now produce about 25% of global GDP, up from 10% in 2000. Just think about that. In just over 2 decades, these 3 countries have more than doubled their share of the global economy. Here's something fascinating about these emerging economies: they're becoming increasingly important in global commodity markets. EMDEs have outstripped advanced economies in demand for primary energy since 2004 and for metals since 2007. China alone now accounts for 60% of global metals demand, up from just 13% in 2000. But, and this is crucial, EMDEs are facing their own perfect storm of challenges. Growth has slowed dramatically, from 5.9% in the 2000s to 3.5% during 2020-24. As of 2025, they are facing the lowest 5-year ahead potential growth rate since 2000. They are facing rising debt levels. Government debt reached 70% of GDP in 2024, the highest since records began in 1970. A big part of this stems from the spending required to prevent their economies from sliding into a depression during COVID-19. But it's not just about how much they owe, it's also about who they owe it to. The creditor landscape has become much more complicated, with China now the largest single bilateral creditor to other EMDS. Climate change poses an existential threat. Climate-related disasters have become more frequent and costly and are putting an immense strain on governments that are already dealing with historic debt burdens.